Welcome to the another edition of the 10 Adventures Adventure More webinar series. My name is Alex from the 10 Adventures team, and I'm really excited to be here today to dive into one of our lesser known mountain destinations. It's a place that maybe not a whole lot of people go to right now. They certainly are going to be in the future, and it's something that should be on everyone's bucket list, and that is Slovenia, specifically trekking in Triglav National Park. It's a place that has some absolutely stunning mountain scenery, so we're really excited to talk with you guys about it today. We have the pleasure of being joined by Rizie, who was, alongside her partner, completed our hut-to-hut Triglav National Park tour last September. So thanks a lot for joining us today to share your experience.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So just going over the agenda here, we're just going to kind of give a little bit of an introduction on what it's like trekking in Slovenia, kind of talk about what makes it a special place, because like I mentioned, it's kind of really a hidden gem destination, especially for mountain adventures right now, but it's something that's going to be picking up over the next couple of years. We've already seen a big uptick. So it is a really special place, so we'll kind of touch on that. And then also just kind of going over your specific itinerary that you did and just kind of touching on the different days, just to kind of see what a sample itinerary and sample adventure is like in the area. So let's just get right into it. Trekking in Slovenia. Like I mentioned, this isn't a place when you think about alpine destinations, especially, mountain destinations in Europe. It's not really at the top of many people's list. You have Switzerland, you have Austria, even like the Dolomites. You have all these places where people continuously flock to every year. And Slovenia is right there in the thick of it with the rest of them. You have a lot of the same, epic mountain scenery, serene alpine valleys, limestone rock formations that are just imposing and standing out above you. It really is exactly, I don't want to say exactly the same because it's unique in its own way, but it is very, very similar to these other destinations. And it's really an up and coming travel destination for people who enjoy mountain scenery, mountain treks, and the like. So Rizie, I was wondering if you could share maybe just what you think after being there, what makes Slovenia such a special place, especially if you're going to explore the mountains.
I absolutely love Slovenia. I had previously gone before, probably about several years ago, but I wasn't an avid hiker back then. So we just took the gondola up to, we were in Bohin, and we just explored that a little bit. And then, it's always just been on my list to go to again. But what makes it so special is that it's kind of, like you said, it's kind of like smack dab in the middle of Europe, and there are so many other destinations that are around it, so it makes it pretty accessible in that terms to get to. And then also, it's even though the Alps are quite large, it's on such a smaller scale than say like the Dolomites or like Switzerland. So, if it's maybe your first time trekking or doing like a hut to hut, I would highly recommend doing the Triglav trek just because of its scale and accessibility.
Yeah, so it's just something that maybe is, especially like you mentioned, if you're a little bit newer to this, it's something that for sure is a bit more of a gateway entry point for people. And because I know really when you think about, if you look at the Alps in general, like it's such a massive, series of mountain ranges, but if you want to look at it as one giant one, you certainly can, but it really is kind of imposing. And if you're not familiar with mountain terrain, if it's kind of your first foray into those sort of activities, it can be kind of daunting and it can be pretty imposing. So I think
for sure,
your point about it just being on a little bit of a smaller scale, being accessible, there are, smaller cities and smaller towns around also, as opposed to being these big, metropolises kind of in the surrounding area. It from a cultural standpoint is maybe a nice entry point, and then also into the adventure travel kind of aspect as well. Both of those elements are kind of nice because it's just a little bit off the beaten path compared to some of these other destinations.
It's true. Yeah, and then also it being off the beaten path, it's kind of like an uncovered gem. So it feels more special that way. You can be like one of the few many that have gone to this destination, and you could say like, oh, I've done Slovenia before, whereas it hasn't kind of gained as much popularity as say like the Dolomites or Mont Blanc. So it's a very special place, and it's quite magical, to say the least. Like it's a very special place. It's got all like different terrains. And it is very similar to the Dolomites in that aspect. Like the ranges are very similar. Like they're not as huge, but it's quite similar in that aspect.
And it's kind of nice because it is a little bit of a hidden gem. It sort of becomes like it's almost your adventure. Like you said, you're blazing your own trail. Sort of, you're one of the few many. I think you said of people who are kind of going and exploring this area. So it really becomes kind of this feeling like it's almost your place, sort of. So that's an interesting point as well.
Yeah, even though there are a lot of people that go on it though.
Absolutely. When we say it's a hidden gem, it's not like nobody's
Yeah,
going here. It is still a
yeah,
very it's still Europe, and it's
for sure.
still there are people who are obviously going hiking there and also going for the cultural aspect. But comparatively speaking to some of these other mountain destinations, it is much less traveled,
For
especially
sure.
on a year-to-year basis. Looking at an itinerary here, so this is actually the itinerary that you did. And I was wondering if you could just kind of talk us through a little bit because you kind of start off here in or right around the shores of Lake Bohine, and then you kind of travel up north and you go into Triglav National Park, which is obviously this rugged collection of mountains and picturesque valleys and all this kind of stuff. You actually go up on Triglav itself. I was wondering if you could just kind of talk us through the different stages.
Yeah, so yeah, we started off in Bohine. We spent a night there in one of the hotels, and then we set off the next day, which is great because booking with you guys, there was a transfer that we were provided with, so it made things a lot easier to get to the trailhead to start our trek. But yeah, it's the first part. I would say the first day wasn't too intense as the hut that you reach on the first day. It's for me coming from Southwest Ontario, which is really flat. It was a little bit of a huff and puff to get up there, but it wasn't. It was manageable. Some people do that some people make that hut. I forget what it was called, but some people make that particular hut almost like a day trip. I talked to a few people who came to that hut that day, and it basically, I think it took us about an hour and a half to get there, but I mean it took some people like 45 minutes because they're well versed in that trail.
It's definitely manageable as a day trip for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely manageable. Like I would say, yeah, like that first part of the trip was quite manageable, and it wasn't too grueling or anything. So it was a really really good start to the multiple day trip.
And from there, did you find like because it wasn't such a really long investment time wise for that first stage? Did you find you had like extra time to just go out and explore, or were you still kind of just like, all right, I
Yeah.
just kind of want to settle in and relax a little bit, or how did you kind of treat that afterwards?
Yeah, so for me, I always like to relax. Whereas my partner, he's kind of like, let's go, let's drop off our stuff, let's keep exploring. And so that's what we did. So we had ample time before dinner to drop off our stuff at this first point, and then to keep going, and to I forget, Bella Peak, I think that was called. It might have been called on our first day. So we were able to do that on the first day to explore, which was really great. So we had like our lunch there at the peak, and then we came back down and then had our dinner.
Yeah, so it sounds like it really does sound like a really nice, manageable first day. Moving, towards Triglav itself, the mountain. It's the highest mountain in Slovenia. Obviously, the terrain there gets really, pretty rugged at some points. What was that kind of like as you sort of approach the mountain? Because I know there are some bits that are maybe not technical, but they are definitely more challenging for sure.
Yeah, so this for our trip, we didn't actually go to the very top of the peak of Mount Triglav, or sorry, Triglav, but we did go just below it, and the excursion towards our next hut was definitely challenging. I had to stop and take breaks, of course, and there's nothing wrong with taking breaks
Oh,
and allowing
absolutely, yeah.
your body to rest. Like don't ever say that you're not allowed to take breaks because they're very very important. But yeah, it gets quite exposed in that region. So, if you are afraid of heights, I used to be quite afraid of heights, but exposing myself to different terrains has really helped me in that aspect. And it's frankly, it was my most favorite type of hiking is to be on an exposed mountain because you get all the really magnificent views. But yeah, you just have to take your time and go slow if things get a little bit too technical. There were moments where I had to kind of like not scramble, but in a sense like just to kind of like hold on and put my poles away. So
Yeah, make
in
sure
that
you have the
sense,
right footing. Make sure you're kind of
yes.
situated to deal with
Oh,
what's
for
going next.
sure.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And there's some great photos coming up that of you and your partner kind of on some of these more exposed sections, and
Yes.
to hear you say that you had maybe like a fear of heights and stuff, or they weren't your favorite, to now you actually really enjoy that type of hiking. When you see the
Yeah.
photos, I mean, it's really interesting to hear you say that because a lot of people it's something that maybe they couldn't like overcome or grow to enjoy. But the fact that you're into that now is actually it's pretty crazy. Um, Moving on from that stage, kind of on this like return loop section almost. You're moving through some more valleys and stuff. I haven't
Yes.
been on this trek myself, but as far as I understand that, just beautiful, beautiful scenery. There's I think some lakes and all that kind of stuff as well. Can you maybe describe that as you're kind of coming back down, I guess, towards Odin?
Yeah. Yeah, so there was opportunity to, do a more difficult part of the trek, which is what we decided to do, which is kind of out of the ordinary for me. I usually like to do not quite difficult, maybe a little bit more easy.
Yeah,
But I felt I was up for the challenge, and I had talked to a few other people that were at the hut at the time because they had done it before, and they let me know what was up, and I figured that I could try it. So yeah, there's an exposed part where there is it's not a via ferrata, but it's a series of pegs and a cable that you have to hold on to. So it was either taking that part of the hike, or you could go down into the valley, which I think would take just a slightly longer, just in terms of like descending and then ascending back up. But that also equally looked gorgeous from where we were up high. But yeah, there's ample opportunity to kind of challenge yourself in that aspect. There's so many different routes that you could take along this trek too. So there's lots of options depending on the difficulty, and you guys lay it out really well. Whether you want to take an easier route, intermediate, or a more advanced. So in that aspect, you can kind of like judging like your like if you're tired that day or you're just not up for it, you can kind of just go from there. At
being
one
able to
point,
change it on the fly is nice.
yeah, exactly, totally. I at one point kind of went on the fly and kind of just went on my own trail, which I don't, not your own trail, but we kind of went through more of like a bushier trail. And I
Yeah.
I don't know if it was on your route, but we went through it, and we saw somebody else going on that trail. So don't always follow everybody that's in front of you. I think that they were making a video for themselves. So, but that particular trail was really fun to go through.
I mean, you made it, so that's all that
Yeah.
matters, right? It's not like you ended up in some dead end thing and you never came back
No,
from that.
no,
So
no.
that's the
I
important part.
I could kind of see from up top where they were going. So I was just like, I think we could take this route instead of going a different way. But yeah, there's so many trails that you can choose from that you can kind of like choose your own adventure.
Yeah, the road less traveled is always pretty great, and
Yeah.
it's also nice though that you're able to kind of talk with other hikers along the route and
Yeah.
kind of get their feedback. They obviously it sounds like they had some experience doing some of these alternate pathways and stuff, so it's
Yep.
it's nice to be able to kind of pick their brain and make the decision kind of as you're going. Like, okay, yeah, you know
Yep.
what, I am feeling good today. This is something that I want to kind of try out, or yeah, maybe I want to take it a little bit. It's mountain terrain, so easier air quotes, but like, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
go down this way instead. So it's
Yeah.
kind of nice that you have that flexibility as well.
For sure.
So moving on into some questions about your trip in particular, what kind of made you choose Slovenia? Like I mentioned, there are tons of other mountain regions, especially in Europe. What kind of stood out to you before? I know you mentioned you had previously gone to Slovenia. Is it something that you kind of thought back and you were like, man, that's really a place I would love to go to again, or what made you choose it?
Yeah, so we were trying to choose a destination in Europe to kind of coincide with a work trip that I was going on.
Okay.
So we had that benefit as well. So we were trying to figure out whether we wanted to go to. It was either the Dolomites that we'd previously gone to several years ago, or Slovenia. And looking at the price difference between the Dolomites and Slovenia, Slovenia is hands down so much more affordable, just in terms of everything. Like when it comes to accommodations, airfare, food, accommodations, possibly for after the trip as well. So affordability was one of the factors. Another one was the closeness to other regions of Europe that we were going to as well, because we were planning on traveling into Croatia afterwards too. So
Okay.
it's just right next to it. So it was very accessible in that sense. And yeah, and then the bus system in Slovenia is very accommodating as well, and also a very 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 affordable. And so yeah, another thing was that yeah, we had gone previously, but yeah, we didn't go on any hiking trips or anything. So that it's always been on my list to go back to, and so we wanted to take advantage of that last year. Because we weren't avid hikers back then, but since we do enjoy hiking and going on these treks, we figured that Slovenia would be a great place to kind of revisit, and do a hut to hut, just because that circuit is there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's always nice when you can kind of come back to a place and have a completely different experience
Oh
than what you
yeah.
had the first time, right? Like it's to go somewhere and then in the back of your mind, it's like, oh, I really would love to go there, but you also sometimes, at least in my mind, sometimes I think, okay, well, I don't maybe want to go back to the same place because I would like to experience something new, right? And that's kind of the drive to go
Right.
to different places and travel around the world. So I think it's to be able to go somewhere and have a completely different experience is a really great thing to kind of a different like avenue, I guess, to explore when you're there. From the infrastructure standpoint, and from the cost standpoint as well, it's one of those things of why this is such a hidden gem right now, because
Yeah.
it really is starting to see an uptick in popularity. I mean, I think last year we had the most bookings in Triglav National Park that we've had ever. So it's really starting to kind of pick up, but it's still at that point where the cost and the infrastructure, everything, it's like everything hasn't caught up to the demand yet. So it's still relatively cheap, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It is quite, I can't say enough how much more affordable it is, especially it being in Europe. So, yeah, it's a great destination to go to if you're looking for a hut to hut trek.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned you kind of weren't hikers the last time that you went, but then I guess you started getting more into it, and this is an experience that you kind of wanted to tackle. Did you have a lot of experience with any of this kind of terrain before, or was this sort of like your first big foray into like mountain trekking?
Well, the very first time we've done like a really big trek was we actually went to the Dolomites for our first big trek.
Right.
And that was a pretty grueling experience because the only hikes that we had previously gone on were here in southwestern Ontario.
It's completely
So
different.
yeah, the first day I was just like, what have I gotten us into? So that was our first experience doing a hut to hut. And then after that, we had gone to like Alberta. We did not necessarily hut to hut, but we did do. There was a hut that we hiked 11 kilometers to, and we stayed there for a few days and just did a bunch of day hikes. And then
Oh, nice.
we kind of make our yearly like summer or like end of summer vacations into like outdoor hiking trips. So we usually pick places that have a lot of hiking destinations or opportunities. Like we've done some hiking in the Adirondacks, in the Pacific Northwest, and then the Southwest U.S. as well. So we've had quite a bit of experience before going to to Triglav in terms of hiking. But sometimes when you get to your destination, you're always just like, did I prepare enough? But you kind of just go as you go along. So yeah.
It sounds like you had, a decent amount of experience leading up into it,
Yes.
especially if you said it
Yeah.
was only just, a few years ago that, you wouldn't have say gone on one of these hiking trips. But you mentioned preparation as well. And in terms of how maybe physically you prepared, is it just that you kind of are regularly hiking now, like throughout the year, so your body's just kind of in shape? Is it more so you looked at this like, okay, this is a yearly sort of trip that we have, I need to get in shape for, or you just kind of didn't really prepare at all? Like, what was your kind of process leading up to the trip itself in terms of getting ready for it?
Yeah. So I tend to stay quite active on the regular. Um, and then usually, I don't know, maybe about 6 months prior to the trip, I try to incorporate a little bit more cardio. And then I know now for future trips to do a lot more lateral movements because there's a lot of unevenness on this terrain. So to kind of prepare your like joints and your knees for any of these types of slippery terrain, it's important to kind of not move necessarily just forward, but just also side to side as well. So perhaps, you know, preparing yourself a little bit more cardio as well as, maybe a visit to your physiotherapist if you have some aches and pains. So I know I did that. I actually injured my Achilles tendon in 2022, and so I was quite I was quite concerned for that trip coming up, and so yeah, I worked with my physiotherapist to kind of work on it. I let them know that I had a big trip coming up, so we worked. I worked with them in that sense. So just to kind of prepare yourself mentally as well as physically, I feel is certainly important if you are going on a multiple day trek like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the mental aspect is something that maybe some people really don't take into consideration. They think, okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
book a trip and I'm going to go on a hike or something. But I mean, this is
Yep.
this is one of those photos that I was talking about here. I
Yeah.
mean, this is a pretty exposed trail, and you got a good gauge piece of wire there to hold on to. But I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah.
if you're not ready for the mental aspect of basically being on a cliff face like that could be pretty jarring, I think, for a lot of people who aren't expecting it. So that's something good to mention. Also, something else that you kind of touched on, which I don't think a lot of people consider, is yeah, going to physio or a chiropractor or something, getting your joints kind of lubed up,
Yeah.
so to say. Like it's something where people think like, okay, if I just go on, a run every day or get my body in shape that way. But if you have like nagging injuries or any of that kind of stuff, always good to try and take care of them and plan ahead, because you never know when
Yeah.
something like that could just kind of pop back into the picture. And that wouldn't, I could imagine walking in this stretch of trail if you had an issue with your Achilles, that wouldn't be the
Yeah.
most comfortable spot to kind of
Yeah.
break down, so to say.
Yeah. And it also helps to have, if you're traveling with a partner, or somebody that you're traveling with, that is also kind of like a champion for you. I know that my partner is very encouraging and very supportive when it comes to these kinds of trips. Like sometimes I'm not so sure of my footing, but having somebody there to kind of cheer you on in the background is also very helpful. So make sure you book a trip with somebody that's very supportive, or you yourself feel very supportive if you're going alone. Because yeah, feeling quite vulnerable on a mountainside is it's a whole other feeling, but it's a really great accomplishment when you do it.
And it can sneak up to even the most, the people who have the highest comfort levels when they're in mountain terrain. Those moments can still sneak up on you. I think that's something
Oh,
to
for
also
sure.
keep in mind too. So
Yeah.
it's nobody's invulnerable to feeling that way once you get out there sometimes.
Yeah, and always trust your gut too. If something doesn't feel right, always trust your gut.
Absolutely, you can always go back. That's a big
Yes.
thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you guys, obviously you mentioned you did a hut to hut trek through Tree National Park. Some of these areas in the park are pretty remote, and the accommodations that are there are remote as well. What was it like kind of staying overnight in those mountain spots? I can imagine waking up and kind of going outside and just being surrounded by like these incredible alpine landscapes, like that's got to be
Yeah.
a pretty great way to wake up in the morning. So what was that like for you?
I love it. It's probably like one of my favorite types of traveling and accommodations. Yeah, just waking up, going to sleep, being surrounded by mountains, and waking up, being surrounded by them is I don't know. It's a great feeling. Um, but yeah, it's really cool because like when you're having this hard day of hiking, you always have it in the back of your mind that you're going to be arriving at this usually gorgeous mountain hut in the middle of nowhere, really. Um, and that's something that kind of drives that for me. It drove me because I knew what was coming. I knew I was going to have great accommodations, somewhere to sleep, as well as a prepared meal ready for me at dinner time. And so it's always something that's really great to look forward to when you're on these really long, grueling hikes. But the accommodations themselves they all vary from region to region. I found these accommodations quite similar to the ones that I stayed in at when I was traveling in the Dolomites.
Okay.
So yeah, like they're mountain huts. Some of them are small. Some of them can be quite large and hold 100 people. But they usually are pretty spacious. They have a common area where people can gather and have dinner, have coffee or snacks. Sometimes there could be live entertainment as well, depending on the time of year. But yeah, they usually put you up in either a shared accommodation, which is a shared room, like kind of dormitory style, and they also have private rooms too, if those are available to you. And yeah, the facilities can be quite sparse, depending on which ones you go to, but some of them might have showers depending. So you could go, a few days without showering, and you might come upon a mountain hut that does have a shower, which is really really great. They usually yeah, they usually cost about €5 to use, depending. And you maybe get 5 minutes, but I mean those 5 minutes are pretty glorious after not showering for a few days. But yeah, it all depends because some of them can be quite sparse, as I said, but then others can be almost quite luxurious in a sense. So it all depends.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things really where there are definitely varying degrees of accommodations, especially when you get in those remote mountain regions. And the really nice ones, the really popular ones, tend to book up very quickly. And that's kind of
Yeah.
one of those things that if you start looking at kind of late season bookings, it's almost like you're kind of getting slim pickings until you get way late in the season, and then nobody's really kind of out in the mountains just because of weather. But it's sort of one of those things where if you don't kind of book early, you might get some of those ones that are a little bit lower on the luxury scale, I guess you could say. But really, anything when you're kind of trekking in the mountains for a couple days on end, that kind of comfort of showing up at a place and knowing you have a place to stay, like you said, is definitely a big comfort. It's kind of as hard as the trail may be, you always have something to kind of tuck into at the end of the night. But then also on the other side of it, that there are going to be other people there as well. And that's kind of a moment where if you share a meal with other hikers or whatever it may be, and just have a conversation or a drink, it's kind of, that's another little kind of creature comfort in itself, right? It's the actual accommodation itself, but then it's also the company that kind of comes along with it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really great to hear other people's stories of, their couple days out on the trail, or, interesting to hear about the other places that they've gone to. And yeah, like it's wonderful meeting people from all over the world, from, of all ages. We've met some really cool people that have had lifelong friendships, or, their first time on the mountains. But yeah, I think that's one of the great aspects of doing a hut to hut like this, is because you get to meet a lot of different people, and then also some of these people are doing the exact same route as you, so you might run into the same people at the same hut time and time again. And that's what happened to us. We met a few other couples and groups of people that were doing the same route. So, passing by them on the hiking trail, we would kind of like root one another on, as well, and then we'd always just say like, "See you at the hut," or like, see you in like a few hours. So it was very nice knowing that those same people were along the route as well.
Yeah, it's always great to kind of make those connections, and
Hmm.
it's just interesting. There are some kind of travel experiences where you do have that day after day where you keep bumping into people all the time, but there's not many really. Like a lot of times, travel is such an independent, like singular thing. It's you going out and it's you doing your own
Hmm.
adventure. But these things, when you're doing it kind of parallel to other people, it's always interesting when you can kind of have those frequent interactions with the same people, and just kind of catch up as you're going along the trail, even though you don't really know them, but you're starting to
No.
get to know them, which is always
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, exactly. For sure.
Speaking about, well, actually, I skipped ahead here. I was gonna jump to the next question, but I guess we'll touch on this one first because this is arguably
Okay.
one of my favorites. I love food. It's one of
Yes.
my favorite things in the entire world, and especially
Yes.
traveling to other countries and kind of exploring their cuisines and stuff. I'm not overly familiar with Slovenian food. So maybe you can kind of touch on it a little bit because you were there previously as well, but then also you were hiking in these remote locations where, when you think about these mountain huts, they got to trek everything up there themselves, which is can be kind of, a pretty logistically challenging kind of feat.
Oh
So
yeah.
there's probably not the most fancy foods that are in these mountain accommodations, but maybe you can just kind of touch on some favorite Slovenian foods if you have any, and then also what the food was like along the tour itself.
Yeah, so I would say that the food in the mountain huts were quite hearty. Like a lot of them are pretty calorie dense.
For
I
sure.
found that a lot of the meals were mostly made out of barley soups. Barley soup is, you'd find that at any hut, I think, in Slovenia, because that's a lot of it was what we had. Sausages as well as bread. And then I did one night have a very memorable pasta dish because it wasn't barley soup. We were also given the choice of like a bolognese, which was quite good. It was amazing. So a big dish of bolognese was one of my very memorable dishes that I had in the hut. And then breakfasts were mostly made up of like either like a hard boiled egg or a scrambled egg. And then there's cold cuts and then bread.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that the meals were too protein heavy. So if you are a person that requires a lot of protein, such as my partner, we brought along our own like protein supplements. We brought along our own
Okay.
like protein bars, which is always just really good to have as well as a snack, or along the trail in between huts, is to just like bring your own food if you can. But a lot of these huts also provide for a fee lunches. If it's not included in the price, you can get a packed lunch. But yeah, some huts, depending on where they're located, some have more than others. Like some might have more. Like I think the one where I had bolognese, it was located more in a valley, and I believe they had a helipad. So I think this one had a lot more access to different types of food. So they didn't just offer barley soup; they offered a little bit more than some of the other ones that were higher in the mountains. So
Yeah.
it all depends on which one. Yeah.
It kind of sounds like you'll get hungry on the trail, but you won't go hungry on the trail, sort of thing. Like
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean? There's a lot of really good hearty food stuff that's going to keep
for
you,
sure.
energized and stuff. But I think you do raise a good point in that bringing along some supplemental stuff, whether it's energy bars or whatever it is,
Hmm.
that's such a great
Hmm.
idea because your body is going through so much as you're working your way through these treks that it's you got to kind of do anything that you can to
Yeah.
keep your energy levels up. And honestly, when you sent this photo of this dessert, I was in the middle of having a coffee and I wanted nothing more than to have a bite of this. It
It's
looked so good.
Yeah, it's their like country's like cream cake. So this is, I think it's really popular. I know when we were in Bohine, it was everywhere. So this was a place in Bohine at the start and the end of our trip that we went to. But yeah, it's a cream cake that's absolutely delicious. And if you go to Slovenia, I highly recommend getting it. But the food overall in Slovenia is really good. I'm just trying to think of like some of the dishes that we had. Uh, in Bohemian,
Barley soup.
there's barley soup. No, I had a really great salad when I was in Bohemian, and I've tried to recreate it here in Canada, and I can't quite get it. It was one of the like outdoor type of restaurants in Bohine along the water, and yeah, they just had like the most delicious chicken and salads. But yeah, the food's excellent in Slovenia.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of good variety for whatever kind of your palate is, which is nice.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this a few times already. We probably sound like a broken record, but Slovenia is, and the Julian Alps in particular, definitely a hidden gem when it comes to mountain adventures. And you mentioned that there were other people on the trail. You know, you were able to kind of hike alongside other people and have conversations and get to know them. Did you find that, like, maybe, compared to the Dolomites, which is very, very popular, how would you say it was along the route, people wise? Was there like a high volume of people, especially maybe around Bohine as well? Was there like a big influx of tourists? What did you find when you were there?
Yeah, in Bohine, I'd say that there was quite a bit. It was quite busy, especially during
Okay.
the day because people, they take buses, tour buses there, and spend the day there for day trips. But as the night war goes on, the population dwindled, so it's not too busy. And I would say like along the trail, it doesn't get really it didn't get really busy. You would see a few people, I don't know, a handful of people along the trail going in either way. But it wasn't too busy that you would like remark on it. Like I wouldn't tell people like, oh wow, like it was so busy. But it was just like a handful of people every time, and the which made the huts easier to navigate as well. Didn't have to wait for the shower for too long. I think I only waited. Maybe there's usually one person ahead of me, and since they were pretty short, you didn't have to wait long. So that was great. The huts weren't busy at all, and yeah, we went on this trip at the beginning of September, which is kind of like nearing the end of the season, but it was still quite populated, but not super busy. That it's worth remarking on.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, when I think of mountain adventures, and obviously like the gold standard, the pinnacle is Everest. People always want to go, and I always see those photos, where there's the giant lineup of people just
Oh
kind of
yeah, I
waiting to get
know.
to the summit, and I just always think when I see those photos is it must just be absolutely terrible standing in that line. Like you're there and you want to experience this, and then you're in like a grocery store queue essentially to get to the top of the mountain, and it's just like it
Yeah.
seems awful. Whereas that's the one thing that's kind of really nice about the fact that this hasn't been built up and it isn't seeing huge volumes of tourists is that you would never encounter any scenario like that. And I think what you mentioned of people kind of in Bohine sort of maybe being a little bit more touristy, a lot of those are day trips coming from Bled or something where there's, like a
Right.
bus tour and a lot of that because it's kind of like Bled's little brother, I think is what they often refer to it as. It's very similar, but it's just kind of removed from more of that tourist circuit. So a lot of that kind of volume is coming from those bus trips. But once those are gone, definitely a little bit more quiet.
Yeah, and I heard from some of the other people that we met in the huts that did go up to Mount Triglav. The lineup to get to the summit wasn't bad at all. Again, there are a numerous amounts of ways to get up to Triglav as well, like ranging from easier to like the most advanced. So yeah, there's lots of opportunity to go up to Mount Triglav without any worry of waiting in line. So which Triglav can be also done in a day. That some people told me, but I think I'd go for the overnight route. But yeah.
I was gonna say it just depends how hard you really want to go for it, I
Oh
guess, right? Because
yeah.
there is the Via Ferrata route as well, which is obviously
Yes.
the ladders and chains and all that kind of stuff, which can
Yeah.
be very daunting for a lot of people. And then there also is, I believe, a route that kind of circumnavigates that, goes around the side a little bit, so that you can kind of avoid more of that technical climbing aspect. So
Yeah.
you're right. There's definitely a lot of different ways to get up there. and I would assume that there are some that are really good for avoiding any crowds that may form.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, so looking at the trip as a whole, obviously a lot of stunning scenery. What was kind of, and it doesn't have to be scenery, but what was the biggest highlight for you on the trip?
Honestly, it's just being like having the opportunity just to be surrounded by these mountains is always a highlight. But I think that one of the main highlights for me was taking the more difficult route along the cable. Not only for the scenery and the views, but also just, you know, challenging myself and, allowing myself to be vulnerable in that sense. But also feeling accomplished as well. So I'd say that that was one of the highlights of the trip of going to Slovenia, was being able to take that opportunity and challenging myself with that particular route.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you go on a trip like this and you're surrounded by like this natural beauty at every single turn, you go over every hill and there's something new to look at. I don't want to say you almost start to forget about it, but it's when you think back in your mind, it's not really those things that are the most memorable moments. It's like you said, it's
Hmm.
those the challenges that you put out to yourself. You took the more difficult route and you had that personal sense of accomplishment and all of those other things and the views along the way kind of tie into that because they're a part of the journey. But it's maybe that those aren't the top highlights as opposed to the actual journey itself. As corny as
Right.
that sounds, I guess it's not.
No,
It's
yeah.
not the destination; it's the journey kind of thing, right? I guess
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
a
yeah. The
long-winded way of saying that.
cliche. Yeah, yeah. It's just honestly like I couldn't pinpoint, like an exact moment, but I think one of the other ones was being able to just kind of stop during one of the routes and to just kind of sit and see tree glove up in the distance because I brought my binoculars as well, and so looking through my binoculars and seeing the tree glove point and then also seeing people kind of just like not like kind of partying I guess up there like near the not necessarily on tree glove but at the hut just below it where they were kind of probably celebrating either their trek up there or they came down, but yeah, being able to see that was wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of seeing them sort of celebrate an achievement or
Yeah,
just even just something small like trail. That's always kind of nice. Yeah, but it's
yeah.
binoculars. That's something I don't know if I've ever actually brought binoculars on a trek, but it might be something I might have to throw in my kit for next time. It's a good
Yeah,
idea.
yeah.
Speaking of throwing stuff in the kit, I guess when you're looking back to when you were packing for this trip, a lot of times people feel or they'll get to a destination and go, man, I really wish I had this. I wish I had this one thing. Why didn't I bring it? Is there anything thinking back where you wish you could have told yourself, make sure you bring this along?
Okay, so this isn't for myself because I'm a pretty good, not to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty good at packing now and kind of seeing, like, kind of thinking through like what I might need
Yeah.
and what should I put in my bag. This is more coming from my partner's side of thing, of the trip. That he wished he had brought along a thinner, warm weather sun shirt because he did bring a sun shirt in, but it was more of I think like a colder weather. I feel like he thought like, we're going to be in the mountains. It's going to be a little bit cooler. But Slovenia proved to be a lot warmer than we had thought going into this trip. And then also the time, it was September. So yeah, in preparation, because of the exposure, there's not a lot of trees when you're up there. You're constantly exposed to the sun for several hours a day. So for him, bringing along a sun shirt, I think a more weather appropriate sun shirt. I had mine, so I was great.
You
Like I
thought
didn't have
ahead.
the sun. I didn't have the sun barreling down on me. I had my UV shirt on. So, but for him, he wishes that he had brought the more appropriate UV shirt rather than the cold weather one. So, if anybody's going on a trip like this, please make sure you bring a long sleeve UV shirt. Like they are excellent.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky balance. I know in the past, especially when I did my first backpacking trip, you pack a whole bunch of things that you think you need, and then you realize very quickly that you didn't need probably half of it to three-quarters of it. You're
Yeah.
just lugging it around the whole time. So it is a delicate balance, and once you have it figured out, which sounds like you do have it figured out, you're kind of able to really look at it and pack more efficiently. But
Hmm.
it's a really great point that you raise about the shirts, because when you're out in the mountains, a lot of people think, okay, I'm on exposed terrain. Like you mentioned, there's not much tree cover. But most people think in that sense, they think about bad weather and they think about rain or snow or wind or whatever it may be. And I don't think a lot of people take into consideration just a beautiful day. Like a beautiful day in the mountains where you're up there and you have no cover at all. It can
Yeah.
be so sunny, and it's just, yeah, I don't know, you get burnt to a crisp, or you're sweating, and it's, yeah, always be prepared with a couple shirt options for sure.
Yeah, layering. Layering is key in the mountains for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. Just lets you be prepared for whatever comes your way.
Yeah.
So you said, a piece of advice for people is bring the proper shirt. We'll
Hmm.
go for another piece of advice, maybe for somebody who's on the fence about trekking in Slovenia. So somebody who thinks maybe this is something that they want to do but aren't sure. Is there any piece of advice, or for a first timer even who maybe has this trip booked, what's a piece of advice that you would give them?
Yeah, so for booking this trip, again, I want to preface the affordability aspect of going to Slovenia, and in that it's looking at other trekking trips, Slovenia's is the cost of it is quite lower than, say, Italy or Switzerland or even France. So if you're on the fence about it, highly recommend checking out Slovenia. And you always and another piece of advice is, make sure you're up for a good challenge, because the mountains, they're no joke. It's a mountain, and so you want to make sure that you're up for the challenge, both mentally and physically. But yeah, just to make sure that you're prepared. Make sure you're prepared with the right clothing, the right equipment, trekking poles. Highly recommend bringing along trekking poles. They're great for when you're descending from those mountaintops and saving your knees.
I think trekking poles are honestly a big one, especially when a lot of people when they're younger think, "Oh, I don't need them, whatever." Like
Oh
it's, you
yeah,
try to be the cool guy or whatever with trekking
yeah,
poles. But honestly, they are coming from somebody who has absolutely terrible knees from just years and years of playing sports. They are a godsend. Like just
yeah.
it just relieves so much stress off of your lower
Hmm.
body, and gives you just a little bit of extra stability as well, because the terrain can be so rugged and kind of uneven.
For sure.
Definitely take trekking poles, because they will save you so much trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
Moving on, I think this is the last question that I have for you.
Hmm.
Any upcoming adventures from you? So you've done Slovenia a couple times now. You've already done the Dolomites. It doesn't have to be a mountain adventure necessarily, but what's next on your list?
Yeah, so we are looking at the possibility of doing a portion of the Camino de Santiago.
Very nice.
I've been in discussions with, I think it was Nadine. I was from Ten Adventures. I was talking to about the Camino de Santiago and the possibility of booking it. But then also, I've during the pandemic, I watched a lot of the show called Escape to the Country, which is situated in the UK, and I've become more interested in the possibility of doing like an English country walk. So those two are kind of on my roster. It's not mountainous or anything, but I get the appeal of going from a town, like going town to town, and being able to have a beer in one part of town, and then walking maybe like you know 10 kilometers on a fairly chill terrain, and having another drink or having a bite to eat. But I think those are along those lines of my next adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. And those both sound unreal. I was in Spain in November and doing
Oh,
doing a
sweet.
couple smaller parts of the Camino. I didn't do a full one. It was more for a work
Yeah,
trip.
yeah.
But the scenery out there is incredible. And I think what's nice about the Camino, and then also some of these walking tours in England as well, is that they kind of tie in a lot more of the culture along the route as well.
Hmm.
Just because you're not as far removed. I mean, the Camino, there are definitely are some sections that are very, very remote. But there are also these villages and towns that you're going through along the way, and
Yeah.
historical sites you're stopping at, and little restaurants and everything. So it does a good job of weaving in those kind of cultural aspects as well, which just makes it a different type of trip completely from
Mm.
solely mountain adventure.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that sounds awesome. I'm really excited for you. Both of those would be incredible. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, looking forward to maybe seeing some photos. So send them our way once
Hmm.
you do get out there.
Yeah, of
So
course.
that's it for the questions I have for you. Audience questions doesn't look like we have any from the audience. Quiet crowd today.
Okay.
So I guess that school's out a little early, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah. So for everyone who's here, I just want to say, thank you very much for attending. I'll put my email and then the Ten Adventures email as well in the chat, just so you can get in touch if you have any questions about trekking in Slovenia or another trip, whatever it may be. But yeah, beyond that, thanks for being here, Rizie. Thanks a lot for sharing your experience with us. I think there's a lot of useful tidbits of information that will hopefully help some people decide on if trekking in Slovenia or even just visiting Slovenia is the right option for them. But it's been a real pleasure, so thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me. I enjoyed this time.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, I guess we'll conclude this edition of the Adventure More webinar series. Again, my name is Alex, and we'll see you on the next webinar.